Hey, it's Micah. Sorry I couldn't get to the phone right now, but I'll call you back as soon as I can. Bye.
Please leave a message after the tone.
Hello, it's Brooke. Pick up. I've got so much to tell you. Anyway, call me back. Love you.
Well, you look so cute, and I swear one day that I'm gonna look cute, but today's not the day.
You look cozy.
I swear people watch this and they're like, does Brooke shower? Does she own anything besides a sweatshirt?
I think
Does she know how to fix her hair?
Both of us. 'Cause I feel like every time I try to look nice for this, eventually I get on the camera and I look like I haven't washed my face for 7 days.
No, you always look gorgeous, and you've got your Texas hair, and I'm like white as a ghost.
Hiding out in your 13 inches of snow.
Yeah. Yeah, in my defense, we're currently having Snowmageddon, so it's starting, literally I got a notification a couple minutes ago. So
And also in her defense, I just got back from a week in Hawaii.
yes.
So
You still got the vacation glow.
I am tired.
I believe it. I'm also very tired.
Should we do our intro before we get into...
Yes.
Welcome back, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's 2025, and that just doesn't seem like real life to me.
I had to write the date on our newsletter. It feels kind of like natural, but it feels that way every year.
And I specifically remember being a senior, and they had us like visit the elementary school. And at the elementary school, they had banners of like graduates of 2026.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's going to be so weird when they're graduating. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's next year. It's very strange.
Or can you imagine the babies that have a 2026 like birth year? That's crazy.
That just broke my brain.
So how were your holidays? What'd you do?
Well, I didn't do anything for Thanksgiving. I didn't do anything for Christmas. And then I came home.
And we're usually big holiday people.
Yeah. I halfway decorated my apartment, but then I was in Texas. Yeah. And then I came home and was like, I am so over this. And I took everything down and boxed it away.
Yeah.
Like,
I know all of ours is down too, but we really only did the fireplace. We didn't even get a tree this year, which is crazy.
I had a little tabletop tree.
Yeah.
But how was Hawaii? Because that was Christmas for you.
Hawaii was amazing. Amazing. I had never been, but just getting to see, specifically, I think Maui was a great place to go for a first time visit. It was just awesome. It was a whole different world.
Is it all still like, are they still doing all the restorative stuff from the fires, or is that, could you tell it all?
No, you could tell. They wanted us to drive through it so that we could see, and it's still all pretty flat. You can tell it's not what it used to be. And then when you first start driving in, it was heartbreaking pictures of everybody that passed away. So there's just a whole line of everyone that unfortunately passed. And it was good to drive through it just to see how much they've had to rebuild already, but it's coming back slowly.
That's good.
Yeah, their day-to-day life is just different than what we do day-to-day here. So, we got to snorkel, and Jake got to dive, and I got to try to surf again, and we went to this little waterfall, kind of scenic kind of hiking route where you could jump off the little cliffs, and that was the best part of it, was just getting to try a whole bunch of new things that, to be quite honest, scared the crap out of me. I have a healthy respect and fear of the ocean.
I'm glad to just be in a kayak and hike the mountains and be on the ground. A lake I can do, river I can do some river rafting.
Yeah.
The ocean is for playing in the shallow end and sunbathing.
I'm gonna learn how to surf.
I guess I do. Words. I like snorkeling, so I like going out and snorkeling, but there's so many scary things about the ocean, like unknown creatures and known creatures.
Yes, snorkeling was more intimidating than surfing was. Surfing's just hard. But snorkeling, it was amazing. It was beautiful. I loved it. I'm glad we did it. But we went pretty far out. Once you get out there and it starts to get a little colder, and it starts to get a little darker when you're looking down.
You start looking
and
around
you start seeing these formations that kind of curve and you don't know where they're going. It's a little like...
Yeah.
You start to feel your anxiety, just like your heart pumps a little bit faster and you're like, holy cow, I am very vulnerable.
Oh my gosh. Well, that sounds fun. I'm glad you got to go.
And then I weenied out on the cliff jump on the waterfall jump.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had told us, they were like, "You're so excited to go see the waterfall," and they have these great pictures, and I was like, yes. I was like, of course. So on my birthday, they were like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, I want to go to the waterfall, obviously." I didn't even think about the fact that I don't like heights. I just said, yes, obviously I'm going to do this. So I followed Jake straight up to the top of I stood
What about
edge.
cliff jumping doesn't say heights to you?
Well, because little kids were doing it. So I said, I can obviously do it. I said I could do it. So then I get to the top. I stood up there for like 28 minutes and did not move because I was psyching myself out so bad. And everybody down below was being so nice and they were trying to cheer me on to do it. I couldn't do it. I had to go to a little lower one and eventually jump. I don't know who I think I am. Jake tried to get me to jump with him. He went by himself. Travis and his little son, who's 7, he was up top with me and he goes, "Micah, I really want you to jump," because he loves it. So he gets up there and he's standing next to me on the jump off ledge. He's like, "If I go, you have to go." And I said, "Okay." I was like, this is 15 minutes in. I said, "Okay, I'll go right after you. I promise, buddy." And I really did mean it when I said it.
You didn't. No, you lied.
Yes, I
You
did.
lied to that
No.
child.
I said, I meant it when I said it. And then he jumped it. I said, I can't do it. So then when I finally jumped from the smaller one and got back down, he was so funny. He goes, "You lied to me." Like, just yelled at. He was so hurt. And his mom goes, "Don't do that. You can't call people liars." And I was like, yes, he can. I lied.
You are a liar.
I
Yep.
lied at the top. I was like, he's got every right to call me out on that. I did. I looked in his face and I lied the entire time. As he was going down, I went, "I'm not doing that."
Okay, but after you did the smaller one, did you then work back up to the bigger one, or you were like, "No, I'm good"?
No, I took too much time standing up at the top
They
one. So I
said,
just
"We
got to
gotta go."
jump. I just got to jump once from the little one. And it was freezing, so nobody wanted to stay in the water that long. But I did do the little one.
I'm proud of you. So good. Congratulations, birthday girl.
Thanks.
And you know, they were all just like, "Dude, be chill. It's her birthday.
Yeah.
Just let her do what she wants on
Yeah,
her birthday.
just let her do. She's gonna either jump or she's not, but man, I still don't even know if I could do it a second time. You know how there's some things you don't do and you go, like, I wish I just would have done it. I don't know.
You're content. You're like, "I'm good."
I'm gonna keep trying to surf. I don't know about cliff diving's not for me. Cliff jumping's not. Waterfall jumping's not for me.
I'm glad you enjoyed your trip,
It was so much fun.
even though you're a little weenie.
You want to get into the meat?
The nitty gritty, I suppose. I don't know. It was kind of nice talking about happy things.
I know. Tell everybody what you wanted to talk about this week.
I wanted to be really selfish this week and talk about grief, which is such a bummer to start 2025 on. But I just therapeutically need this. And,
Yeah.
you know, if I would normally call you and talk to you about it anyway, why not just do it? And maybe it'll have some substance to help other people.
Yeah.
My grandma, my granny is what I call her, she battled cancer for 10 years and it just was coming and going. So it had just been a really difficult 10 years for her. And then obviously, like, chemo and radiation are very hard on your body. And so ultimately, she had all these side effects that we had anticipated. You know, I had discussed with my mom, like, this is what you can expect, and this is going to be her quality of life. And I don't know when it's going to happen, but you need to, like, start preparing yourself, like we all do. And so, like, a couple of times they had called us and said, like, "Oh, she's in the ICU. We know that this is going on, and we just don't know if it's operable," whatever. So that whole thing with side effects was going on. And then they get her in the ICU the second time around, and I guess they did a scan, and her cancer was back, just full blast. And so it wasn't even really an option of, like, can we treat the cancer? Can we treat this other thing that was going on? But ultimately, like, whatever we were going to do was going to put her in more pain and suffering. And she expressed to us that she didn't want to do that. And, like, she was cognitive enough to recognize us and tell us stories. And just kind of slowly over the week that we were there, you kind of saw the decline. She was so funny. Like, she was very witty even until her final day. And everything was about making sure her family loved Jesus. And even all the nurses in the hospital, everybody that came to visit her, she kept asking them, "Do you really know Jesus? Like, do you really know Jesus?" Which was honestly just a really cool thing to witness. Her parents were missionaries. She grew up in Japan. But being there, we finally put her in comfort care and we knew we were saying goodbye. And, it was still really hard, even though you're anticipating it. It's still a loss and it still hurts. But what was most like significant for me, I'm really able to turn on my analytical brain and be like, okay, as a nurse, what would I do in this scenario?
Right.
Let's make sure she's comfortable. Let's make sure the family's okay. Let's make sure she has everything she needs. And that way I don't have to deal with emotions. And that just works better for me. But what really got me is like, I know everybody thinks of their grandma, they're close to their grandma. And yeah, I was really close to my grandma growing up, not so much in the recent years because I had been in school and whatnot. Like, you don't think about your aunts and uncles and your parents and their relationship with your grandparents. Those are the people that held their hand and hugged them when they cried and walked them to school and dealt with their drama. Like, I just had never thought of it in that mind frame, which is so silly because duh, that's what it is.
Right.
But like looking at my mom, who I'm like, oh, I love my mom. She's my best friend. Had her ups and downs, but we're closer than ever. And just thinking, this is her mommy. She's sitting and holding her hand and being there for her mommy. And it broke my heart to watch my mom, one, just be as strong as she was, but I don't know, you just see her heart aching and how she's holding it down and holding it together for everybody. And I had never had that mindset about it. And then that took me to a whole different place. But I just was thinking, like, I just have a really hard time with grief and understanding grief and letting myself feel the emotions that are required to go through grief. And so I thought, what a great topic for us to talk about today.
What an uplifting and positive
like, it's
podcast
depressing,
to open
but it
up.
doesn't have to be. It can be a tool, So
No, it is. It's good. I know. It's been a rough couple weeks.
yeah. Well, and then you think back to like all the different kinds of grief. So let's just go into that. You want to?
Yes, I do. Okay, so the biggest thing that I think I would start with is that grief, at least for me, in what I think of as grief, can be very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
But I think it's only because, which I think you described very well in the last part of your story, is that once you feel it and once it's allowed to kind of break the dam or the chasm kind of that you've been kind of holding up, it's very heavy. And there's a lot of ways that I think grief comes unexpectedly sometimes, or maybe you're almost dreading it. It's like you called it anticipated grief, which I thought was a really good way to put it. But there are things that are inevitably coming, even if they're not immediate. And when you get caught up on those things, it's so much easier just to block it off because there's no use realistically in sitting and crying over something that hasn't happened yet. But that doesn't make the anticipation of it any less real or any less heartbreaking. And so I think when you let grief become what it needs to become to work through whatever it is that you are grieving over, it's very, very heavy and it's very consuming at times. And so when I don't want to deal with that, I close the dam, and it's very uncomfortable for me, especially if it's not something that I understand why someone else is so upset or so heartbroken or so grieved over. Sometimes you don't know what to do with that. You did to help, right? Or to be around it or be in the same space with it. And you're like, I don't know. It's very uncomfortable. And I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people too, because grieving itself is a heavy word. And that it's not the same thing as being hurt or upset or
sad. It's not just sad. Yeah.
Because when it means that much to the person that's feeling it, it's not comparable to somebody else who isn't in that space or in that experience at the time. So there's we named a lot of different things just over text, that kind of different types of grief, but that's what I wanted to start with, is because if it's almost uncomfortable to unpack it in a way, because it's like, at least for people who feel a lot, if you're going to feel it, it needs to be the full extent of it, because otherwise it's inauthentic in a way, and I don't want to deal with it, and it's uncomfortable and I don't like it, because it also makes you very vulnerable in the moment.
Yes. And vulnerability.
Sucks.
Yeah. No, and I think too, like, I get really frustrated because when I lost my cousin, it's been almost 2 years now, which is like wild for me to comprehend. I went to our school counselor, and she had said, these are the stages of grief, blah, blah, blah. See which one sounds, the most familiar with your situation, yada, yada, yada. And she's like, you're probably in the denial stage. And I'm like, but I'm not denying. I know that she died. Medically, I understand the process that happened, But she's like, well, your denial can also be the denial of you're just not allowing yourself to feel the emotions of loss. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I was just frustrated overall with her whole approach of just like, here are these 5 stages and see which one correlates best with you.
Well, my unpopular opinion is that I think the stages of grief are bullshit.
Absolutely.
Excuse my French.
And the woman that did all the research and named those stages, she even says that. She wrote a big book, and they talked about it on this podcast I listened to. But the lady who originally did all the research for this, like back in the 1960s, she wrote in her book, this is just a guide, like a tool for people to use. There are no set stages. There are no set time frames. There are no rules. There's no rhyme or reason. It comes in waves. It's not linear. And she wrote this massive book about grief, and not even about the stages, but she just kind of categorized some of it, and she had so much else to say. And then somehow people took that book and went, okay, we'll take that, and that, and we'll make these 5 stages and call it a day. Right. So even the woman who came up with this concept, that was never her intention.
It was never made to be like an X plus Y equals.
Yeah, it's never
You're going to get over it in 6 months and 7 days.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. Brene Brown says this all the time. It takes however long it has to take. And that's the only thing we know about it. Yeah. Other than that, it's just a roller coaster. And, you have to just hang on and deal with it.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because it can come unexpectedly when something happens and you're working through the process of grieving something, because you can be happy and you can have good moments, and then all of a sudden it will come out of nowhere. It's a personal question, but what's your, I guess, biggest thing that you have grieved, and what did it feel like, and are you over it yet?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. Everything big, like massive grief that was really in my experience was like deep and hurtful and not just like a surface level grief, has all happened in the last 2 years.
Well, because this is in like a morbid humor way. You and I have not experienced grief in the same way. Like when I think of your grief in a lot of ways, I think about tangible losses, which is not funny at all, right? But it's just the opposite of, because I haven't lost anybody in my family that I think, I mean, I was sad when my grandpa died, right? I loved him, but I know that I didn't carry grief for that. As awful as that sounds, I loved my grandpa, but that was my dad's dad. And I know the grief.
But I don't think that is awful either.
Well, right, but it's just different, right? Because I know you've lost people that have been something you've grieved over that has affected the past, present, and future, right? And that's a thing to grieve over, but it's different in concepts of, that's why I like how you said like the anticipated grief, or like the grief of expectation, or for me, like a lot of grief has come from my walk in faith. There's a lot of things that I've like grieved over that I've done in faith. And so it's just different because it almost feels like, I don't know what that word is, but mine's more of a like metaphorical grief almost, even though it's very real to me. But I can almost pinpoint in your life, I'd be like, oh, well, duh, I would grieve over that too, but I haven't experienced that. I haven't lost in any way, shape, or form as traumatically as you've lost some things. So I think that's why I wanted to hear your take on it, because it's different having experienced it from that place versus what.
Well, and I think it's important too, like, this is that disenfranchised grief. Your grief, even though it's different and it's not something that is like so up in everybody else's faces, it's still valid.
Right.
And you still have those emotions and you still go through the quote unquote stages. It just may not be as visible to everybody else, but it's still your experience and it's real. It's not for anybody else to be like, or even yourself. Like, I think there's some guilt even that goes along with that, or I don't know if guilt's the right word, but you feel like,
I think guilt is right.
I don't have something actually tangible. Like, what am I upset about?
Okay, that's a great way to put it though, because it's like, why am I sad about this? She's, especially with you and me, I think she's lost not to be a Debbie Downer, because she handled it amazingly, but she's lost a lot. And like, I love you. But it's the truth. I'm sorry. But it's just like, you look at it and she's like, okay, we look at our own situation and go, okay, I really don't have time or the right to be sad about that. And I'm saying sad like it's the same thing, but you know what I mean? And I don't have the right to feel the way I feel about this, or for it to be as heavy on me as this other thing, because the other thing was so much more present almost than that grief of the future, grief of expectation, or all of that. But I think guilty's a really good way to put it, because when you get guilty, that's when you start shoving it down.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, it's not the time to deal with it. It's not the place.
Yeah, and I had even like mentioned this too in my notes, that there was, do you remember that sweet little puppy that had the tumor and ended up passing away, and you were very upset about it and you took it very hard?
I did.
And I'm not gonna lie, there was
there
was a brief moment of me that thought, I don't understand I don't understand
a lot of
why that is so important to you. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think about it. It doesn't matter. Like, you still are allowed to feel that without judgment, you know? So if that's meaningful to you and that hurts your soul, then it does. And you're still allotted, the chance to grieve that experience. And that's not for anybody else to judge. But one of the things they said on that podcast I was listening to is, the worst loss is yours.
Yeah.
So you have to think about that from anybody's life. My experience is not their experience. So if this is the worst, if being in a pandemic is the worst thing they've ever experienced, then that's their peak worst. If losing a pet is the worst they've experienced, that's their peak worst. Just like if losing a loved one really early in life is your peak, your peaks are all equal. Like, that's, the max amount of hurt.
What you're saying, yes, is true. But I think that's hard to put in practice. When I saw it in your notes too, at least if you're an empathetic person, like I know we both are, you look out and you try to understand where everybody else is at, and you look at other people's surroundings or scenarios or what they're going through, and you think, there's people out there that have lost a child, right? And there's people out there that have lost a spouse, or there's people out there that have lost a limb, or there's people, that are fighting a terminal illness. And you go, okay, this probably is not something that it's not that, right? At least what I'm dealing with is not that, because I don't even know if I can't handle this thing that's hurting me now. How on earth could anybody ever survive losing everything that they have in a house fire? It's just a complicated.
Yeah, and I think you just don't know until you're in that situation. I loved this podcast I listened to. It was Brene Brown and somebody else, but the guy, her guest speaker, he had lost his son, and he was a grief counselor. And so he had talked to many, many parents who had been through the same thing. And he said after he went through it himself, he felt like he owed all of them an apology, because he had no idea. He thought he was projecting that he knew the pain they were going through and was trying to help them through it. But he just said there's no way for anybody to comprehend that pain unless they are dealing with it themselves. But it doesn't take away from everybody else's experiences. And he says too that judgment always demands punishment. So judgment, whether you are judging somebody else's situation, that's either going to hurt them or it's going to hurt you. Because it's either coming out of a bad place in your heart, or it's going to take other people down a dark road that they don't need to go on. So like, you'll either feel the guilt of kind of what he went through, of saying like, gosh, I feel so horrible that I had judged their situations when I had no idea. And I think that's the same thing of like what we were talking about earlier. Like, even little kids, like when they don't get their way or they lose a pet or whatever, that seems so small to adults who have experienced more. But we have to try to understand, like, that's their peak. So,
Right.
And I think also the people that are judgmental and not empathetic, and they kind of go, it's not that big of a deal. I don't understand what the big deal is. Why can't you just move on from it?
Right.
I think that they all are experiencing the same experience. It gets reflected differently. Like, whether you become angry, or you become irritated easily, or it
Right.
becomes your drive. So then you're like ultra motivated to do something
Right.
else. You're still having that experience. You're just having it very differently than the people who need to cry.
Well, I was going to say, grief doesn't even look like tears or
Yeah.
falling, like flailing and falling on the floor and depression. It doesn't look like all of that all the time.
It can be like being obsessive
It's-
about your job, or, you know.
Or a lot of people's is anger, you know, because we all have different, we're not all super emotional human beings. We're not all super, I don't even like the word sensitive necessarily, but we are all sensitive to certain things, right? Our trigger points are just different. And whether your sensitivity makes you angry as a reaction, or your grief makes you hostile as a reaction, or makes you seclude yourself from everybody as a reaction, or in, I guess, a more positive light, it can push people to do a lot, but it can become obsessive in a way,
Yeah.
you know, where you forget your health or your family, or to maintain a daily life, because somehow that's how you're dealing with it. That's not how I deal with grief, so I don't understand that particularly. I'm like, I don't know how people keep moving when horrible things happen, because for me it shuts me down. But I know that that's the reaction, because the way I handle things is very different from the way he handles things.
Like my mom, even, you know, I was trying to make her like, just please sit down for a second.
Yes.
And she went straight to work. She was cleaning the house, she was planning the funeral, she was
Constantly
getting things
moving.
arranged. Just go. And I was like, please take a nap, eat some food, you know. But she needed that. That's how she had to work through it.
Yeah. Because sitting there with that, it's gonna lead to something, I think, less productive, in that is falling apart. And I think moving through it is how a lot of people deal with it. Again, I don't understand it, because that's not how I deal with things. But I know people like that, and I've seen it. I'm like, I don't understand why you don't just let yourself sit down and be hurt. Or be heartbroken.
Well, and what's strange too is there are so many different experiences of it. And so some people, sometimes me, I'm like, I want to run away from this feeling, so I will do anything else than feel hurt or pain or emotions. Like, I will, whatever. Like, I'll go crazy at the gym. I will go find other people to pour into. I just don't want to face this. And then some people actually really enjoy, in a weird way, like going through that pain. Like, one of the things in grief is placing blame. So it's like they're placing the blame on themselves, so they feel like they have to feel that pain because they deserve it.
Right.
Which, that's a whole different, you know, thing. I know a lot of people that would be so scared of this topic and think like, how does this relate to me?
Well, right, because it goes back to that first thing. It's uncomfortable.
Like for you with the dog thing, I don't share that experience, but if it were my baby, if it were my Sammy, yeah, I'm with you. Like, she's family to me. Dogs at the rescue, you have that empathy for them, and you don't know them, you don't know their walk of life, but you have this strong empathy. And some people would be like, okay, but why? Who cares? I deal with that like at the hospital. I have all these patients that I don't know them. I might be with them for 24 hours. I might be with them for a week. But going through that, losing a patient, some people might be like, you didn't even know them, so who cares? Right. But it's very heavy. So but like, I can understand that.
You have the skills too to look at it medically. Versus how close it is to the patient's
like
family.
Disconnect. Yeah.
It still hurts, and I'm sure that there's like a weight, but it's almost like a catch-22, because in some ways you handle it better because you can look at it medically. But your emotions are still wrapped into it, and it's constant. It's the environment that you're in every single day.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe we're both crazy and we're just very empathetic, but I feel like everybody has their thing, you know?
I think a lot of people grieve specifically a future that they had in mind. Whether, I don't really know if that, I think it ties into grief of expectation, but there's a lot of dreams that we have in our 20s or in our 30s, and this idea of kind of how we had our life planned out that more times than not does not end up like we thought it would. And so having to navigate those twists and turns, whether it is on you for choices you've made, right? Or circumstances that just didn't come to pass. I think that that is really, really heavy for a lot of people.
I think that's part of grieving expectations is like,
Yeah.
even if you're like grieving a breakup, like what I went through, my whole life changed. My whole path of everything, it changed. And what I thought was going to be was no more. And all my plans were done. And there was no planning for that. It was very cut and dry. Boom, things are changing. And that was hard to deal with.
Well, I think it's different too, specifically as women, but that changes everything for, at least for us. We're both planning on getting married, planning on having kids, planning on building homes and families. And unfortunately, there is a time clock on women to do those things. That puts a different pressure on this decade, specifically in your 20s. This is when you're supposed to figure it all out and supposed to have it all settled down and to make the plans that are supposed to stick. And then it's like something gets swept out from under you. And that's tragic in and of itself for the loss that you experienced of what you had planned just for a future too.
Yeah. There's like several different subcategories, but there's some main categories of different kinds of losses. So I was just going to run through those. We have unexpected traumatic loss, anticipated, like a terminal illness, old age, disenfranchised. It's a loss that other people probably wouldn't validate.
Right.
Loss of self, loss of experience. Then you have the collective grief, which is like communal. Like the pandemic was a huge one. Oh, and then cumulative grief, which I think is what's happening over here, is
ding ding ding.
Multiple types of losses in a brief period of time. So
loss is not hard for me to understand. Not knowing why we lose things or why there's grief isn't hard for me to understand. But the back to back to back to back, that's when I sit there and I go, God, why? You know, when some people don't experience that for links at a time or at all when it comes to people. And then it's one thing after another. They'll lose a kid to a school shooting, and then a parent to cancer, and then their house is foreclosed on, and then their pet gets hit by a car. And it's just like, why?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I don't know how you would live through that.
One of the things that they talked about on the podcast, they talked about how that understanding of why. Like, why do we feel grief, and why do we go through this, and why do people have back-to-back losses? Like, we'll never know. But they talked about people have to stop looking at loss as something that was celebratory or something that was a test, because it's never a test. It just is. Like, we have loss because we live in a broken world, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no formula of like, oh, God thinks this is the perfect time for you to go through X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I believe that things just happen.
Yeah.
And there is no...
That's crazy, because I have written in my teeny tiny little spread of notes, one of those sentences is, lost isn't a test, it's just a part of life.
Yeah, it's not a test. Like, and I think as Christians, we try to think of, you know, God gives the... What is that stupid phrase? I hate it. God
doesn't give us more than we can handle.
His hardest battles to his strongest soldiers or whatever. And it's like, no. Do I think that God like leads our lives in certain directions? Yes. But do I think he like cherry picks like, oh, I'm going to make sure this person passes away, or you experience this loss, or you go through grief at this time? I think that things just happen. I get really frustrated as a believer that people go down this cookie cutter kind of almost rehearse thing of like, oh, well, they're in a better place now and you should just be happy. And it's like, be for real right now. Like, how are you saying what you're saying to somebody that just lost somebody? I know you mean well, but people are allowed to be sad and mourn and whatever. And one of the things I hate the most is that everything happens for a reason. Like, no, everything just happens, and God makes good things out of bad circumstances. Like, God is always going to prevail. He's always going to find a way for there to be good to come of this. But he didn't purposely make this happen. There's free will, there's evil.
Right. Yeah. But I don't think that God is up there going, okay, well, let's have 9/11 happen so that the country can come together. That's how I'm going to do that. you know?
Yeah.
Or on a personal level, God's not up there going. I think the biggest example of a test, right, in the Bible would be Job, who lost everything because God allowed Satan to take it from him.
Yeah.
God just took, for that premise in that story, his protection off of Job to prove the point to Satan that Job's faith was bigger than his losses that he incurred. But at the same time, even though God didn't curse Job and say, he didn't do all that, Satan did all that. He just took his hand off of him to be able to do that in that moment. And he then restored everything twofold.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that a lot of times we blame God for a loss, but I don't think God causes loss.
Yeah.
I think he uses it, and I think we grow from it, and I think that he can, like you said, he has a plan to make good out of bad things that happen. But we sit here and we go, okay, well, that woman's husband is beating on her, and we go, okay, well, God, why are you allowing this to happen? Right? And it's just bad people doing bad things.
And I think too, some of those situations, not all of them, and what I'm about to say, people are going to take the wrong way, but sometimes it's our own doing. If you're not using discernment, asking God for, you know, this relationship, and then you push and push and push for this relationship to work, even though there are clear signs that you shouldn't be a part of it, you got into something that God did not give his blessing, and then you're going, God, why is this happening to me?
Right.
Well, because he didn't put you there in the first place. So what are you doing there?
Right.
And that's not for every situation, but there are some of those situations.
There are definitely some of those situations, especially when we're asking, like, okay, God, you know, reveal your plan, and then the plan gets revealed and we choose to ignore it. There's situations too where you just get in with a bad person too. That's not every situation, but you get in with a bad person who then reveals that evil nature before you were aware of it. But again, that's not, God didn't set you in that relationship so that you could get pummeled and beat down and all of this. You know, you were deceived and you got into a relationship with someone who wasn't who they presented, right? But then out of that, God can still restore it.
And like what we touched on last time we recorded, of saying, like, I talked about the one woman who said, God wouldn't want me to be this unhappy. And it's like, well, God doesn't promise us happiness. Right. So, I mean, it very well could be that you are in that situation for a reason. And like you said, there's restoration that can come of it.
Right.
But I just really think all of that depends on you. Like, you have to be able to hear the will of what God wants for your life.
I just think overall we are putting bad things that happen, which we talked about this in the last episode too. We put every bad thing that happens, we say, okay, well, God can't be good then.
Yeah.
If he's so mean and destructive and vengeful that he would just cause bad things to happen to everybody, especially some people multiple times, end on end on end, and he doesn't care and he never intervenes. And I just think we put that way too much on God instead of saying we live in a really broken, sad world where bad things just happen and we don't know why. And it doesn't mean God doesn't have the power to stop it. It just means that here on this earth, good things can come out of bad things, even if we don't understand why they happened. And I think that that's hard. And we're saying all this now, but then when bad things happen to us, we're like, like, you must be joking.
Right. I definitely do the, like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, is this a joke? Are you serious right now? I just think, like, God is so much bigger than anything I could comprehend that it's not for me to know why. And so I just, like, I can't even go there, or I think I would spiral out.
I think I understand that concept more now as I'm getting older and as I'm coming to understand the Bible and God's character more. But there's definitely still times that I sit there and I'm that exact person that I'm describing. I go, why would you do this? Why would you allow this to happen? What's the point? You know, if you're so good at spotting, and this is just me being honest, if you're so good at knowing who's evil and who's not, why would you allow something so evil to even exist?
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard to comprehend that, but that comes from emotion. That doesn't come from sitting down and logically thinking about. Right. It doesn't make an excuse and it doesn't give a reason, but it does constantly remind you that no matter what happens, God is good. So if God is good, he's not a part of this evil thing that happened.
And I think that really is a part of, like, the anger blame that most of us tend to go through. Like, we need somebody to blame it on for us to feel better, and God's just the easy option. I don't know if I've told this story before, but whenever people are asking the why question, or they're explaining like their anger and frustration with God, I absolutely understand it. I've been there. I try not to go there, but I have been there. But one of the greatest examples was my Uncle Mark. When my cousin Jamin passed away, he had called everybody into like this family meeting basically in the living room, and he, everybody's looking at him. One, he's the father of this woman who died, and two, he's a pastor, and he's always been like calm, cool, and collected. He's always had scripture to back up what he was saying. And so it's like, here he is in this situation, we're all on the edge of our seats. What is he gonna say? Because how can there be anything good that comes of this? So we know he can't stand up here and give us this cookie cutter routine, because we know better. We know that he doesn't feel that way.
Right.
So, like, he got up there, was very vulnerable with all of us. And I really think this was so monumental for my faith. But he stood in front of everybody and he said, I think he did say, I am angry and I want to throw a tantrum like my 2-year-old grandson. I really do. I want to kick and scream and cry and ask God why. But God has been so good to our family. We have had so many blessings. We have asked him for things and the answer has always been yes. And this time we asked God for a miracle and the answer was no. And we have to be okay with that. And we are still going to believe that God is good. And as a family, we're going to remain faithful, because sometimes the answer is just no. And as much as we don't like that, it's not up to us. And for him to sit there in front of like, we were all crying, like watching him say this. It was just I have so much respect for him. And I don't know, like, everybody is imperfect and whatever. And I'm not saying that he handles grief perfectly. I don't know. But in that moment, for him to have done that, I have so much respect for him and just how he handled that, and how in literally his darkest moment, he lost his daughter and a grandson, and was able to sit up there and be that example of faith to his whole family. I just commend him greatly for that.
Well, I think too, not that loss gets any easier as people get older, right? But to have that level of faith too when there was an infant involved as well, obviously Jamin had the closer connection with the family, but I don't think anybody understands at all when a child passes away. Like, you can find maybe that acceptance to say, okay, I don't understand it and I don't like it, but to have that extra component of not only losing a child but losing a grandchild too, so suddenly, and not only a daughter but a mother to already earthborn children, a brother to already earthborn siblings. That's probably, if you could categorize grief, that's up there. That's heavy.
Well, and I think it was so important for him to be that vulnerable with all of us. Like, the pastor's supposed to know how to handle everything, right? And for him to be that vulnerable to go up and say, I am angry and I'm gonna be angry about this, but I also have to accept that no is the answer and God is still good. Like, it's so good to have that example, in that almost like, not that you need it, but this permission of, feel your feelings. You're allowed to feel your feelings. You should feel your feelings. You should be angry. You should be upset. You should cry. But at the end of the day, you still have to rest knowing God is good.
Well, too, you have to think, if this man of God can be angry and still believe in God and not lose his faith, the two can exist at the same time. You can be angry. Just don't lose your faith at the same time. The Bible says be angry and don't sin. You can feel that. That's a valid emotion. But don't let that cloud your judgment on who God is, even when we don't understand why things happen.
Is there anything else you want to say before I move on to...
No, I don't think so.
I was gonna say, like, we could probably go back and forth all day about like different grievances we've had, or like, wow, this is so horrible and so tragic.
Here's what I have.
But the important thing is, like, yeah, we can list all these grievances and talk about it, and that's therapeutic for us to talk about it. But I more so wanted to have this conversation, like, as an example of what my Uncle Mark did. Like, it's so easy for us to look put together and show up to work and show up to family things and just be like, yep, I'm good.
Right.
But we also have to allow people to feel their feelings and be vulnerable and be that example of vulnerability, because I think that's the only way you can really truly heal. I went to, okay, well, this grief thing that I think about feels like secular in how we manage it. It feels very like, okay, go see a therapist or go to a counseling group or whatever. But what does the Bible say about grief? And then I thought, what did Jesus grieve? And of course, everybody knows the famous Jesus wept, when Lazarus died. And he even knew he was coming back, and he still wept.
Right.
And then when John the Baptist passed away, was killed, not passed away. He was killed.
That was not passed away.
He was murdered.
Violently murdered.
He left. He went to be in solitude and to grieve and to mourn. So if Jesus says, heck yeah, dude, I'm crying. This is my best friend. Like, this is someone that's meaningful to me. I'm taking a second and I'm crying out to God about this. And I'm going to go seek solitude, and I'm going to allow myself the opportunity to feel these feelings. Then I think, everybody else should be okay with that. Everybody else should feel validation in that of like, okay, well, Jesus did this. So I don't have to show up to church and be happy and be cookie cutter and not cry and not be messy. You're allowed to be messy.
The only thing that I was going to say, which again, everything we're talking about is very tragic, but my Instagram is now showing me every single, I guess, influencer or person on that platform that is now sharing their miscarriage online, which I get information about is great, because you don't want to feel like you're alone if you experience that. Part of me understands the thought behind it, but I could count at least 4 within the last week that have posted about their miscarriage, but then said that the next day, immediately after, they went to church the next morning. I can understand the thought behind it, but I can also understand being so incredibly upset and hurt and devastated that you just need a minute.
Need to be alone, yeah.
To not be surrounded by people who truthfully, sadly, don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that churches were full, and there are good churches that are full of people that care. That's not the point of this one. But to go and surround, if you're not particularly close to your community in that church and feeling like you need to show up to do a duty in the midst of something like that, as heavy as it is, when you said that, and to not need to show up to church the next day, and that's okay. It just made me think of that, because I've seen that from at least 4 different people this week. I can commend that kind of faith, right?
Yeah.
When you are close enough to do that and go and need that to be your healing place.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand it.
Even if you go, so like in those scenarios of the people that they go to church the next day, but people don't really care. I also get that kind of vibe, like when people go and they offer empathy, but they don't know you.
Right.
And then you're like, this empathy feels fake. But it could, it's probably their truest form of what they have to offer at the moment, because they don't know you, but they want to be kind to you. I don't know. That would just be hard.
I think I'm just so used to dealing with things in general, good, bad, ugly, everything in between, on my own. I don't understand that level of community, and maybe that's on me, but
well, that's what I was just about to say, is I have such a wall up with people, so it's hard for me to accept that.
I would rather you not say anything and just learn about it and pray secretly, if that's what you want to do, than walk up and feel like you need to say, I'm sorry, or I'm praying for you, or, Yeah,
definitely. I think some people too come up and they want to empathize with you and they want to talk with you about your story, and they may not know you very well, but not that you owe anybody anything. But I think by walking with you through yours, in a way, it heals some part of them, which maybe is selfish, but I just think that's the honest truth.
Yeah, I think that's probably more true than a lot of people realize, which is, I don't know if it's sad, but it's not what you need in the moment. You know, you don't want to feel like it's just so foreign for me because I'm not one to talk to anybody about anything that's bothering me or I'm going through unless it's literally you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just not how I would handle it. What I have dealt with so far, it's been between me, God, and Brooklyn. That's the triangle. That's the triangle.
Which is still, I think still we can categorize that into support, community support.
Community.
I'm
It's
the
a small
community.
It's a small community, but it's a mighty community.
Small but mighty, for sure. Well, I'm kind of the same. Other than for me, I post things on social media, which some people are like, you just need attention.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe some people do, but that's not the heart behind why I do things like that.
I feel like you can tell though.
Yeah, I think you can too. But for me, it makes it more real. And I have such a hard time grasping. Like, there are days that I will be walking through my house and go, Jamin's dead. You know, like, it just, it's hard for me to, my mind can't really wrap around. And I quite literally gasp like that. And it hits you and it's hard for me to comprehend. So if I do things like, you know, if you post on their anniversary of their death or you post on their birthday or whatever,
Right.
to me, that's therapeutic in a way of like, okay, you're not crazy. This was real and it's okay.
Well, as much as we're talking about dealing with things alone, I also have a note that literally says it's really hard to feel grief alone.
Yes.
Even though that's what we're used to. I think those documentations sometimes, and when I mean I can tell, like I can tell if somebody's crying in front of a camera to record it and upload it later and get sympathy.
Yeah.
Or is doing something crazy and doing some kind of skit to just rage bait people. You can always tell that kind of thing. But I do think there's genuine intention in documenting things to say, hey, I'm at this chapter in my life, or I'm at this point in my journey, or I can look back on this day and think, okay, this was a year ago.
Well, in that, the grief counselor on that podcast, one of the things he said, grief demands to be witnessed. Not that you can like wrap it up with a bow, but like for you to come to terms with things, it has to be witnessed. Otherwise, it's just going to fester and fester and fester.
Yeah.
And it's never going to, not that it ever resolves. I think you live with it forever. It's just how you live with it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if that's the way that you allow it to be witnessed, then so be it. And again, it's that judgment thing of like, everybody's loss is personal to them. And so if somebody's judging how you're handling it, good for them. Like, they handle their stuff their own way. You handle your stuff your way.
Yeah.
If they're upset with it, like,
I think
let them carry that.
There's a lot of swallowing your pride when you see messages about like, hey, I saw one the other day and I truthfully don't even remember what the message was, but it was long and she was asking for prayer for their family. She said they're going through something traumatic and if you're a praying person, we need you to join in together. And I think those things are authentic, and those things in that anticipated grief for whatever they were dealing with that was coming, whether it was for healing or just helping them move through it after it had happened, I think that takes a lot of like swallowing that vulnerability and that pride and that feeling like, oh, I'm going to be really embarrassed if I ask people for help in any sort of way, which isn't embarrassing, or it shouldn't be. But it is for a lot of people who try to handle things on their own.
Yeah.
But there does come a point where I think, like you said, grief, if you need help with it, if you need prayer, there should be that moment when you reach out, even if it's not a big community or online. If you're not posting online, you should reach out to somebody and say, hey, this is what's been going on and I'm not, this is where I'm at with dealing with it.
Yeah. So for me, I'm at that point where I've had so many things over the last 3 years where I'm like, okay, well, I can just push it to the side for now, and I can focus on school, and I can focus on my new job, I can focus on my new place and my dog and whatever. And now I've like run out of things to focus on. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I deal with this? And I don't want to do the whole like therapy thing. And I don't want to like talk about my feelings with my family. And that's just very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I've come to terms with, those are your only options, so suck it up and you're gonna do it. So
I think a really big point though, too, with how you deal with it, and maybe it's not how you deal with it, but I think a comforting, at least for me, comforting thought is that, back to the story about Jesus and Lazarus, Lazarus and John the Baptist and all, even on the cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
God feels pain, like feels
Yes.
our pain.
Yes.
Right? Not even just Jesus in his human form felt pain, but to understand that God understands grief and pain and mourning and sorrow, and to know that he's not just vicious and vengeful when bad things happen, but he feels those tears and he feels that sinking in your chest, and he feels that rumble of like you are feeling the anxiety coming up and you don't want to eat and you can't sleep and you don't want to move, or you are just angry, and like he feels all of that and he can understand it.
And I think that's so comforting, because in my experience, I think a lot of Christians feel like they're doing something wrong. Like, you feel like you're doing something wrong by being so sad for so long, or so angry for so long, or whatever it is. He feels it too, and you shouldn't feel ashamed of doing that, and it's not wrong to do that. And whoever has made people feel that way, I want to just like shake him.
So the angriest that I have ever been at God, right, through no doing of his own, but just through me, was me on a run in a park, like on a trail, taking off this little ledge by the lake, and I literally, I think, just screamed, bawling my eyes out for like 30 minutes about whatever was going on, and just saying horrible things, which it does not make it right. God's there to listen, and he wants to hear, and he already knows what you're feeling, so you might as well just let it out. You know, he's not offended by how you feel and by your misunderstanding of the situation.
When Jesus was mourning John the Baptist, he cried out to God. And I think he wants that. That's part of having a relationship.
Well, right before Jesus is arrested, he's sweating blood. He's so grieved by what is coming. And he says, please, if there's any way you can take this cup from me, please take it. And if that's not the most human experience, just to think that our Lord was saying, please, I'm scared. I don't want to feel the pain that's coming. Of all people in the world, I didn't do anything to deserve this. And to just sit there and think you have to be so stressed out that you start sweating blood, which is a scientific phenomenon that I have never seen before in my life and probably will not. But I believe it because it's in the Bible. And to think that Jesus could be so human in that moment and still, like your uncle, right, still feel those things and still believe in God and say, okay, but if this is what you want me to do,
I'm going to be faithful. Yeah.
I guess sometimes the answer is no. Please take this cup from me. No. Yeah. Because it's not a good thing, but I will turn it into the best thing that has ever happened.
And I think it's important too, my advice to people in the past has been, well, you don't have to really say anything. God knows what's on your heart. He knows your tears are your prayers. You're huffing and sighing. That is your prayer to God. He understands that. That communication to him is meaningful.
Yeah, I think some of the most powerful prayers have been when I've just laid in bed and just had tears just falling. And you can't say anything. It's casting that burden on him. And it's saying, it's so painful. I don't want to feel this. You take it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's going to go away in an instant. But I do believe that just saying, I don't want it. I'm scared. I'm hurt. I'm lost. I'm angry. I don't want to feel any of that. I don't know what to do with it. And it's a lot easier said than done.
Yes.
And it doesn't happen overnight.
We're all saying this very passively, but we understand.
We're all saying this in the trenches of stuff right now. We're saying this in the trenches of probably sobbing asleep tonight and going, please help. Just help.
And I remember a lot of things that I went through, I just kept saying God, just please help me see the good in this. When the good comes, please help me to know that this is the good. Just please help me to remember that there will be good. And I just kept telling myself that over and over and over. This sucks right now, but something good is going to happen.
With that prayer too, they're let me see the good in it, right? It kind of goes back to, it might not be the good that you are picturing in your head.
Yeah.
Because God doesn't promise that, okay, well, if you get your heart broken, I'm going to send your husband 3 business days later.
Right.
And
that Amazon Prime shipping.
And everything's going to be tip-top in shape. You're just going to suffer for 3 days. That's not That's not it. It might be,
Yeah.
God, my heart is broken. So the good in it is, okay, let me heal it. Let you learn how to trust me to actually heal it.
Back to this worldly, I don't know, cycle of the concept of grief and the little wheel that they give you. They talk about the most important thing at the end is your purpose. So, like, the biggest thing is, okay, this happened, so it's your job to figure out now, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
What is your purpose going to be from this? Because it's not just that, I don't think the bad things happen and God says, oh, I'm going to, again, like, I'm going to cherry pick this and sit it in your lap and it's going to be good.
Right.
I think just how we had talked about previously, catching the bus. Like, if God gives you the bus, you need to run to catch it. So I think you still have to do the work of, okay, what is my purpose in this? How can I help other people? And maybe that's my goal for like this podcast in some weird way, is like, okay, well, at least I can talk about this now and maybe it'll help somebody. Maybe I can make that my purpose for what I'm going through.
Right.
Like, I can talk about losing my cousin. I can talk about the tragic end of my relationship. I can talk about losing my grandma, and maybe that can be an outlet to other people. Maybe I can make that my purpose. But if I were just to sit and hold that in and just go, okay, well, when's the good gonna come? You know, like, you have to meet him halfway and decide, how am I gonna pick myself up after this? Anyway, if you're grieving and it's messy, or you're grieving and you don't feel that moved, there's no right or wrong answer, and you're not alone in what you're going through. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable and to talk to people and to get help if you need it.
Even if you're not talking to other people about it, or
Yeah.
even if you're going through it by yourself, everybody is dealing with some version of it.
If you're the kind of person that you don't have a big, messy, deep seated grief, it's okay to not feel it at an extreme level. Like, that's not something to be ashamed of either.
Yeah.
And I would just encourage anybody to, I know this is back to the cookie cutter thing that I don't like, but encourage you and remind you that there is hope in Jesus. And if you've lost a life, I'd encourage you to find ways to celebrate the life without discrediting the loss, because I think that's very possible and I think it's very healthy.
Yeah.
And that's my advice for the day.
I think the ending, the bow tie on the whole thing is just, the verse that I had down was Psalm 34:18, and it's, I think a lot of people would know it, but it's, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. So I think that that's a good just reminder that even though it's bad, it's not, it's as cliche as it comes, but it's not always going to be bad.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of this made sense, but it was certainly a therapy session for me. So selfishly, thanks. I think a lot of times I get on here and I'm like amped up and like,
we both sound like we do meth.
Yeah. We don't do drugs, but I feel like this was a lot more mellow.
Yes. And I think once we get a little more on our feet again, we'll just, okay, this is a good opener. This is off with a bang, I hope.
Let's get y'all hyped for the new year while we talk about dying and grief and sadness.
And sorrow.
Yippee!
Alright, well, you can find us on Instagram and on the website and on YouTube.
Yeah, please go to our web. Okay, so housekeeping. You can follow us on Instagram. Please do like our stuff, share our stuff if you feel so obliged. Check out our YouTube, which our YouTube's actually doing really well. Better than our Spotify, which is kind of weird. Listen to us, subscribe to our Spotify. On the website, please, 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 please. We're trying to make some merch, and I just want to know what people would wear. So there's an opportunity right now to vote on color and design, which we have tons and tons of designs, but we're just putting out 3 right now to get a feel for what people like. So yeah, go on there, and at the very least, please go vote for a sweatshirt.
Just humor us.
There's also like little prompts you can answer. If you have your own story of grief that maybe just therapeutically for you, you need to share that with somebody, there's a little chat box. You can tell us whatever story you want. It could be inspirational, it can be therapeutic, whatever you need. And that's it. That's all I got.
And that's it. We had so much to tell you.
We'll have so much to tell you next week without all the rambling.
And scene.
And scene.